This is an SR Suntour M3010 front suspension unit. In order to disassemble it, we're going to require a 10mm socket and ratchet, a fork spanner wrench, 2 flathead screwdrivers, and 1 wooden dowel. The hammer is optional. The first thing that we're going to do is to loosen up these nuts from the bottom of these retention bolts. Don't remove them all the way because sometimes the retention bolt gets stuck inside the assembly and we may use the hammer to tap on them in order to free the stuck bolt. When I push on these with my fingers, they move freely, so we're not going to need the hammer, and honestly, you probably shouldn't need it either. Next, we're going to take our fork spanner wrench and remove the plastic caps from the top of the stanchion tubes. The left side cap is a blank. It's basically there to keep moisture out, but the right side cap actually acts as a retention device to keep the spring in place when it undergoes compression. There is no compression on the spring as the unit is right now, so you can remove the cap without any worry. It's not going to come flying out. Next, we're going to remove the spring from the right side. It's going to be very greasy, so just keep that in mind. Also note that the white part is facing upwards for reassembly's purposes. So now we're going to take these nuts off all the way from these retention rods and pull the upper and lower apart. It should come pretty easily. If it doesn't, just give it a couple yanks and it should pop apart. You're going to notice these 2 retention rods hanging out the bottom of the stanchions. The one with the rubber bushing and the plastic spacer is the side that houses the spring. So let's go ahead and remove these little nuts from the rod. And once that's done, we can actually just slide the rod out the stanchion, and you'll notice that it comes along with a rubber bushing. Keep track of that bushing, you don't want to lose it. And now we're going to do the other side. Again, you just need to remove the nut from the rod and then keep in mind the orientation of the parts. So it's a nut, a plastic spacer, and then a large rubber bushing. This way we can assemble it back with no problems. Go ahead and slide the rod out of the stanchions, and you'll notice that this one also comes with a rubber bushing that we do not want to lose. You can wipe down the stanchion tubes, look for any wear or damage, and go ahead and set it aside. Next, we're going to work on our lowers. To remove the dust caps, just use your fingers to pry them off. Don't use any sharp tools or screwdrivers or anything like that because you may mar the plastic of the sleeve or cut the rubber. They come off very easily. You just got to pry them up and off they go. This next part is going to be a little tricky. You're going to notice this little tiny black retention tab inside of the sleeve. We're going to need to pry up on this as we pull the sleeve upwards. But in order to get enough clearance to do that, we have to use a wooden dowel. This animation should help make things a little more clear as to what we're going to be doing. You can see in this cross-sectional view, we have the retention clip, the sleeve, and the lowers. There's a little gap that we need to create by using the wooden dowel as a tapping rod. So go ahead and knock the sleeve up. You'll get about 2mm of clearance at the top, and we can use that to our advantage. Once we pry that little tab up, we'll be able to stick a second screwdriver in that little 2mm gap and pry the sleeve up out of the assembly. Be careful not to break that tab. If you break the tab, you'll have to replace this sleeve with a brand new one. The tab is all that holds this thing in place. So now that we kind of know what we're doing, in practice it looks like this. We take the wooden dowel and we're going to just tap a couple times on the bottom of that sleeve. And you'll notice here that we have about a 2mm gap, just a little bit of clearance, that's all that you need. Don't tap any more than that. And now we're going to identify where the retaining tab is, right there. And this is where things become a little bit tricky. You need some dexterity to do this. With one hand, you're going to want to gently pry up that tab with one screwdriver. And once it's pried upwards, use a second screwdriver to just push under the lip, that 2mm gap. Just lift it up and the sleeve will just slip right out of there. Be careful, again, not to break that tab. So once they're removed, you can go ahead and put a rod down there with a rag, or put some cleaner in it, or however you like to clean these things. This one's pretty clean as it is, so I don't have to do much of a deep cleaning on it. Take all the rubber parts, the dust cap, the slider, and remove any dust, any dirt, any grime, any old grease. Just go ahead and wipe it off, clean it down. I really like this Slicoleum stuff. I was using a lithium type of grease for a while, but I tried this out and it's way better. It lasts longer and it gives you better performance. So I'm taking it and coating the inside and pretty much just all around this slider. I'm putting this Slicoleum. And when you go to reinsert it, just make sure that the tab lines up with the little section in the lowers, and when you push it in place, it'll click, and that's it. The dust seals, I like to put a little bit of grease on them, and then you're just going to use your hands to just push them into place. And that's all it takes. Just give everything a little tug to make sure it's not loose or anything, and that's all there is to it. Do the same for the other side, and you should be good to go. Okay, I like to put a little bit of grease on everything. So I put a little bit on the stanchions, and now I'm putting a little bit of grease on these retaining rods and the bushing. When you go to slide it down the stanchion tube, if it doesn't center, just shake the stanchions around a little bit and it'll find its way through. Once the rod is all the way through, you're going to want to go ahead and thread the nut back onto it, and then do the right side. So I have these parts together so I wouldn't forget which way they went back together. But basically a little coat of grease on everything, and then we're going to drop it down the stanchion tube, shake it around a little so the rod goes all the way through. It's kind of hard to get it on your first try. I don't think that ever happens to me. And there we go. And now we're going to put the large bushing on first, followed by the plastic slider, and then finally we're going to just hand tighten the nut. Just put it on as far as it'll go, and that's it. You do not need to torque this thing down. Okay, now we're going to recombine the lowers and the uppers. Just go ahead and slide the assembly together like this. You're probably going to have some trouble getting those retention rods to thread through the centers of the lowers. Just shake it around and kind of move it around a little bit, and eventually the rods will find their way. As you can see here, both rods are sticking through the lowers, and we're ready to put the nuts back on. Just put them on hand tight as far as you can get them. Unless the system's in compression, it's going to be impossible to torque these down. So now we're going to take our spring, make sure you put some grease on it, and the white cap is pointing upwards. Just slip it in the right side. Now we're going to put our plastic caps back in place. You can put them on hand tight and then use the wrench to torque them down a little bit. Don't go crazy on the torque for, with anything that you're doing on this fork. Make sure it's tight enough. Experience will tell you that. You don't want to strip anything out, but you also don't want to be too loose. So I don't know. I guess just experiment. And now we're going to take our ratchet and we're going to tighten up these bottom bolts here. Again, not too tight, not too loose. I don't have a torque number for you, but experience will tell you how tight is tight enough. So just get them on there fairly tight. You don't want them coming out. I suppose you could use a little bit of thread locker, some very weak thread locker on there, but it's going to be trouble getting it out for later disassembly. After you're done, just give it a little bench compression test and everything should be good to go. Now you've completed your surface on the SR Suntour M3010.